Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? We'll start the last and final presentation. It'll be moderated by your second favorite moderator. After quite a bit of arm twisting and emotional blackmail by Nilesh and Aman. Okay, anyway. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the speakers and they're going to take their seats as I call their names, and that's the order in which we will go. First of all, we want to acknowledge and really appreciate the presence of the Honorable Assistant Minister for Education, Heritage and Arts, Mr. Joseph Nityanand. Thank you, Mr. Nand. Okay, just a quick description of Mr. Nand. He's a school teacher by profession for the last 23 years. The last position that he held was that of Vice Principal. He holds a Master's in Arts in Agriculture and a postgraduate certificate. And he's a former coach of the Nandi football team, right there. So we are major rivals because I'm from the Suva soccer team. But don't worry, I won't be biased against you. Okay, so the minister will deliver his address and he has to leave because he has a prior urgent commitment. Okay, so we thank you for coming. Okay, the other speakers are Mr. Apisolome Tundreu, and he's from the Methodist Church of Fiji and Rotuma. Honorable Sitiveni Rambuka, the leader of the opposition, and also the Sodelpa leader. Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, who's a member of Parliament and the leader of the National Federation Party and the former dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of the South Pacific. And finally, Ruby Quanson, who's from the Kettering Foundation. Your favorite moderator. She's part of the panel today. Okay, each speaker has 10 minutes. Okay, so you can start, Minister.
The moderator, respected panelists, Honorable Leader of Opposition, Honorable Professor Biman. As I look around this room, I pay my homage to distinguished ladies and gentlemen who have served this nation with dignity. And many of them I know. They have shaped where our nation is today. I once again pay my obeisances and pay my homage to you all. Bula Binaka, Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good afternoon to you all. I'm honored to be invited as part of such a dignified panel amongst various academics to dwell on the topic of national concern, social cohesion, and the state's role in fostering dialogue. Social cohesion is a willingness of members of our society to cooperate with each other in order to survive and prosper. When members of the community know and accept the fact that although they may have different values, beliefs, practices, traits, etc., but in order for harmonious existence, there is a critical need for some level of tolerance, integration, and understanding of national goals, interests. Social cohesion, ladies and gentlemen, is important for the state to be very stable because it contributes on social solidarity, works towards the well-being of all its members, fights exclusion and marginalization, promotes inclusiveness and interaction, creates a sense of belongings by the members, and at the end of the day, it promotes trust. Social cohesion contributes to a wide variety of social outcomes. But today, I will dwell on 4 major areas which include but are not limited to. Number 1, empowering districts and divisions with areas identified, engaging with the community to understand the underlying issues. Number 2, building long-term communal, national, and international relationships. Number 3, taking a targeted action where there is a breach. And number 4, evaluating and sharing the outcomes. Distinguished gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready as individual, or is Fiji ready to capitalize on protecting social cohesion and the roles and responsibilities that come with it? Are we ready to embed social cohesion objectives in organizational policies and processes with our current organizational structure, culture, standards, protocols, planning systems, communications, and training? Or are we ready to make relevant reviews, amendments to our existing practices, policies to accommodate the need for social cohesion to happen? In most cases, My focus today may shift to our government or our Ministry of Education, Heritage and Arts, or examples as such may emanate from there, but the discussion and follow-up in no way need to be limited to the same. How societal willingness can be measured will be an interesting area of discussion following my presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, social cohesion for Fiji is a touchy subject, one which must be treaded upon carefully since surrounding areas rest on memories of the past, stories of disturbance told and retold to the current generation and self-delivered loose ends which may plant fears of uncertain futures. These factors leads to stumbling blocks into an attempted formation of a harmonious and prosperous society by individuals, religious bodies, non-governmental organizations, and the government of the day. The very concept of cohesion is deeply rooted in the Constitution, where no discrimination of any creed or kind is clearly stipulated. Living in a multicultural, multiracial, multilingual society such as ours, there may arise a number of incidents which can temper or harm the cohesion in places, since social cohesion has a strong emotional aspect. Societies with identity past have continued rebuilding in order for communities to coexist amidst trust issues. Hence, there is a need for continued reassurance that history will not repeat itself. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no better way than wide consultation, followed by pilot projects, and finally, its implementation. This is the current practice in the Education Ministry with the current curriculum, which has undergone wide consultation and numerous stakeholders. Yet, no amount of dialogue is enough dialogue. Thus, despite the level of consultation, we are of the view that the current curriculum is still ready to undergo knife and be further reviewed. Thus, having segments such as democracy education, citizenship education, electrical system, etc., embedded amongst the core subject indicates these values in our children from a very young age, leading to no or low resistance to social cohesion policies as they grow up to become responsible citizens of Fiji. This concept is strongly reflected in our ministry's mission and vision. Children don't see race, they don't see religion, they don't see color and creed, gender differences. Just visit a school during lunchtime and your heart will warm up to a big group of children uninhibited of race and religion, sitting in a comfortable circle, freely sharing food, stories, and laughter. Our children can indeed teach us a thing or two. Ladies and gentlemen, when did we learn to hate? Or let me put it in a very simple way. Is it difficult concept to unlearn? In this growing virtual world, it is a priority of communities to work hard and come together for real time. Community fundraising, sporting bazaars are very good local examples. Not stopping there, international exchange programs take us a step further into lasting international relationship beyond borders. Scholarships provided by other countries give our citizens the opportunity to live and prosper in an environment perhaps totally parallel to our own. Fiji's peacekeepers, who spend years away from their own environment, learn to coexist peacefully on the other side of the world. All these experiences gained in foreign environments help strengthen relationships and understand differences back home. Our Ivan society is swiftly moving towards individualism, and the state's role comes out very clearly during communal consultation, amidst where dialogue is seen in most cases as the only way out. Some very major issues, such as that of land tenures, has been amicably solved by dialogue. Also, officers from different departments, such as the social welfare, visit geographically inaccessible areas and hold a number of dialogues, sessions, inclusively. Our government also promotes community nursing and policing, right up to the very remote outpost, where their grievances are heard and addressed in public forums like this. Women's expos are held at the national levels, where gender and violence issues, amongst other things, are addressed. Our Fiji National Curriculum Framework has undergone nationwide stakeholder consultation before it became the educator's guideline, which correctly followed will yield children who are educated for change, peace, and progress, ready to strengthen the existing societal models. With growing connectivity, social cohesion is challenged on a daily basis, where people and communities have more freedom to express their opinion on social media, but at the same time, more opportunities are available to create awareness and togetherness, since the world has turned into a mere global village. In Fiji, we have a very strongly visionary district solidarities. With soccer and national solidarity with rugby, isn't sports, or in our case, the most powerful tool for social cohesion? There will always be disgruntled individuals, families, groups, communities, majority or minority who will have personal issues or fuel the fire to break existing bonds. Oftentimes, these are not deliberate moves, but empathies are born out of previous communal or personal experiences, with a particular race, gender, or even religion. It could also be inhibitions inherited from popular beliefs, rumors, or societal beliefs that a particular gender is a minority and that fits outside the societal circles. This could lead to incognito. Thus, there is a genuine need to educate the society, to respect all, respect being the beginning of the harmonious existence. In some circumstances, immigrants and expected workers might go through a very difficult time where cooperation from both angles become an issue which affects the very existence. Group cohesiveness arises when bonds link members of the social group to one another and to the group as a whole. Although cohesion is a multifaceted process, but it can be broken down into four main components. One, social relations. Number two, task relation, perceived unity, and emotions. All four must be of great care in an inclusive and responsive way. It is vital that every dialogue session to evaluate and share ideas and monitor any new implementations. Otherwise, most action plans to foster peace die a very slow, unnoticed death. A major area identified is that of responding to breaches of societal order. Swift action must be taken to curb these breaches before an individual's idea become a group's ideology. The government's strong stand on social media is one such example of curbing the spread of unchecked and unverified information. Ladies and gentlemen, the state's role is very, very clear: to give way to education and awareness of both, to provide venues and avenues for healthy dialogues. Engage the community not only to voice out but to understand the deeply rooted problems, to find lasting solution and not mere patchwork remedy. To uproot fear and give strong reassurance to ensure that people bring out their problems and treat them with permanent solution. To ensure that justice is not only seen to be done, and all citizens of a multifaceted society feel and belong the same. Distinguished guests, distinguished leaders, Honorable Leader of Opposition, Honorable Professor Abhiman, and all those very familiar distinguished faces who have worked so hard into making Fiji a place to live. I pay my homage once again, I recalls, and thank you very much for your time, for listening. I have to attend Nandronga Novosa Provincial Council Secondary School Sports Association Prize Giving Awards. I have been former coach of Nandronga for 14 years, and my legs are really itchy now to go and visiting Atoka, and that is also the place where I reside. So in the future, I would have loved to take many questions and discuss, because we have such a distinguished gentleman sitting around here. Perhaps in future, if I am notified a bit earlier on, then probably I will reschedule my other engagements and be with you. Thank you very much for your time. God bless you all.
Thank you, Honorable Assistant Minister, for a really thought-provoking speech. It's a great pity that you won't be with us for the rest of the afternoon, but we really appreciate your presence here today. Thank you. Arman, if you could please escort the Minister. Okay, we will now have our second speaker for the topic on building social cohesion, Mr. Apisolome Tundreu from the Methodist Church of Fiji.
Naka. First, I want to thank Dialogue Fiji for the invitation to the church. The president was in fact invited, but he is in a meeting today, has other commitments. I'm sorry about my voice, and I'll try my best to talk about the church, its purpose, and particularly the role that it plays in developing the values we believe are good for social cohesion. That's where the role of the church is. And then maybe allow for some discussion from the points that I will be speaking on. So it's really speaking generally about the church and its role in the promotion of social cohesion. I must say that my first challenge was understanding what cohesion means. I worked in the Ministry of National Reconciliation, and we threw around racial understanding, racial harmony. And there were plenty of things that we spoke about. And then, of course, we wanted to challenge the system by establishing a framework for National Reconciliation Commission. Unfortunately, the way it was read by other stakeholders created the tension that probably led to some of the difficulties. But our purpose at this time, and when I talk about social cohesion, was the way in which we had designed a moment for people to re-experience the difficult moments we've gone through. It was really to provide a legal framework. And so understanding what we wanted to do at the time, I want to speak about the church and what it's supposed to stand for or do, which I believe are positive for social cohesion. So my idea of social cohesion is really whether diversity enriches our common experience as a nation. And in that, to be able to correct the past and build a good city, a good nation for all our citizens. I'm sorry, can you help me through this? Where is this one, yeah? Sorry about my purpose, therefore, is to go quickly through the purpose of the church and its programs, talk about the structure of the church very quickly, its operation in Fiji, and then deal with some of the programs that come under my department. I am the secretary at the moment of the Department of Christian Citizenship and Social Service. And so I believe that this kind of question falls into the kind of activities that we run for the church. And let me also say that when we talk about the department I come from, the church actually organizes its activities where the members are, in the local churches. So if you can imagine that there is a department in the ministry, in the headquarters, but really the activities I'm going to talk about, we expect to encourage at the local level. And of course, refer to the Lakwa Niveau of the church at the Jubilee celebration, the 50th year of its independence in 2014. They declared a way of addressing issues that were important for the nation through key result areas which we would organize activities in the church to achieve progress on. So it was called the New Exodus. This is a term from the Bible. Many of those who are Christians who read the Christian Bible will understand where this comes from. And then, of course, if I can, I'll talk about a number of options that we are looking at. That's the church purpose is in the Constitution, and it's actually about just worship. It's about evangelism. It's about fellowship, nurturing. And it's also about ministry, and this is where this sort of work that we are talking about falls. And then, of course, we are supposed to educate and train our people, the community, as well as our practitioners. And like any organization, we have to make some money, fundraise. And you know what we do in the church. We also have commercial operations that are now designed to achieve the kind of financing we need. There's missionary work, of course, but there's also a fairly important role by government, by the church, oftentimes called political. The church has a prophetic voice. It stands to say what it believes is God's understanding of the situation and how people in various positions are supposed to do their job. And also at the same time, in moments of darkness, the church should be able to stand firm and be a place where people go to because there's calm and hope there. That's what the church is about. Now, the church, of course, in the various ways we've stated in the Constitution, is responding to the original call, the Great Commission in the Bible. Christ's command, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey every commandment that I've taught you. Basically, the Great Commission, we normally call it, but it is important, as we've discovered through this consultation, that the new norms, as we understand it, whether new or not, but we are saying that we are troubled by the new way people are living their lives. And this is the cause of the lack of cohesion. And some of these I'm mentioning. It's individualistic, it's authoritarian, there's quite a bit of dishonesty visibly exposed. Seems more selfishness is the rule. I talk about the abusive culture, oppressive, violent, irreligious, indifferent. The list goes on. I was at a Vodafone Foundation conference just before this, and they listed quite a number of heavy topics that we were supposed to try to address. And I'm just reflecting again. But I want to say one thing, and I think sometimes we're misunderstood as a church, any religious organization for that matter, about what we are supposed to be about. But I just want to say that having looked at the conditions that we want to address, the purpose of the church should not be just about evangelism and social action. It's not just about preaching the gospel. The idea in the circumstances we're in, and to make sure we're okay for the future, is to redeem our cultures. Plato famously said, our people can never be better than the obscene stories about our gods. And this is a very important statement because the mindset is so important. The church is about trying to redeem a mindset. And so the church is about doing this through biblical principles, and this to become the ethos, the way of life. And I speak about ethos in the original meaning, when race was really not a term, but people were judged by the way they thought. So ethos is the root for ethnic and ethic of today. Now, there is one key result area. What time is it? I'm sorry.
2 more minutes.
So it's really about strengthening relationship into church, into religion, civil society, government, and other groups. That's really the idea in promoting social cohesion. It's about being able to engage with the diversity that we have. Very quickly there, as I leave this behind, as a statement on what we do. It's our terms of reference as a department and the programs that happen at the local churches. But these are the key things in our programs. Last year we decided that instead of following the environment, the violence, the gender sensitivity issues as parallel activities, that we would go back to the families. Begin with your family. Get the values organized, get the practices and the cultures organized. All our traditions come from there, the way we express our faith. The church is recognized under the Constitution as the institution that will protect the way people express their faith, which is protected under the Constitution. So the church is therefore left really to deal with this, but at the same time, go down to the basic unit. So that's the way in which we are going. There are a number of programs over there, but the key thing for us is community mobilization for our cause. Everyone to believe in the same thing and to try to achieve what we're setting out. We have 195,000 active members. In the 2017 Constitution, 309,500 Methodists. Now we want to make sure we engage them to better this nation. But of course, as you know, with social media, the minority rules the day. and not helped by leadership being visibly about divisive behavior. People are not valued on the public space, so people do not really care about others. I think there is a developing individualistic and uncaring, indifferent culture because our kids are watching this. And partnership, of course, at the very end is an important issue for us. As a culture, there's a structure when you want to look at it. I just want to talk about the future. The options for us is the focus on the family to strengthen, nurture good values, practice in young people. But let me also say that when you develop a keen following for a particular value, it must mean also a robust sense of outrage when these are not practiced. This is what we should be about. That you will stand up and say to the next person, our kids need to say that is wrong. Our kids, our families will have to begin to believe. I notice that they're teaching anti-corruption now in the schools. It doesn't help when we are legalistic about bad behavior so that there is a different kind of treatment because you can use this system. Our children are watching. To mobilize the community, to strengthen good governance, the leadership institutions, and I want to say we have to recognize our cultural and religious institutions as necessary pillars for making sure our fair values are right. We need also a participatory approach to be mandatory, and also there should be a movement in Fiji for understanding, reconciliation, and real engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again, and I'm really honored to be part of this illustrious panel. I mean, we've got our leaders here with us, so we thank them as well for the opportunity to participate with them. Now,
Thank you, Mr. Tundreu, and we are also privileged to have you here addressing us today. Another round of applause, please. Okay, our next speaker, the Honorable Sidiveni Rambuka.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I was going to volunteer my 5 minutes to Tundreu and 5 minutes to offer my 5 minutes to Biman. And then I just clap. But thank you very much for your very kind invitation for me to be here this afternoon. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't have anything there to be projected up there. I will speak to you on my own experiences in trying to forge dialogue and then sustainable peace. It is really ironic that a person who disturbed the peace was to be called to try and reinvent peace and happy cohesion in a country. But it was a great honor to have worked for that objective during my time of leadership. When Parliament passed the amendment process for the Constitution of 1990, a lot of people said, why do you need to change the Constitution? I said to them, you do not know about the 1990 Constitution. The 1990 Constitution was a facilitating constitution to bring everybody back to Parliament. Because it had served its purpose, we needed Parliament to manufacture and design the new Constitution. After we had passed the process in Parliament, word came back to me that the opposition was not going to come to the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee if I was going to chair it. So I said, Felipe, my Minister for Education, you be the chairman of the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee on the Constitution. After a while, they got stuck. They were back polarized in their own party politics and race politics of the time, and trade union and employer corners at the time. So one day I had a surprise invitation from the ambassador for the United States, and I went. He said, "Come for lunch." So I went for lunch. And when I walked in to the lunch area, which was not his dining room, the other person in the room stood up and tried to leave. It was Mr. Jairam Reddy, the leader of the opposition. He thought he couldn't stand being there with me. But the ambassador, being a diplomat, exercised the best of his diplomacy and at least got us to sit together. And then we had soup and the salad and the main course. And then we spoke. We spoke and we spoke. And I said, "How's the committee going?" He said, "Not moving. Can I help?" He said, I think you'll come and make it worse. So I said, "Well, let's try it." So they agreed to sit. And I came back and sat, and we put into place the 1997 Constitution. And it came back to Parliament, and one of the members of the commission, our nominee, he went against our product. He said the multi-party cabinet was never a part of our recommendation. I had to admit that it was not, but I told them, we are going into uncharted waters. We've got to be bold enough to try anything. And that's how we had the multi-party cabinet clause written into our Constitution. We're into the same sort of process right now. We're trying to recreate sustainable peace or social cohesion. And one of the presenters this morning tried to define what cohesion is. And I believe that it is the coming together of divergent views. And as long as humanity has existed, we have had the polarization of ideas. Even civilization, we talk about civilization. It is the acquisition against acquiescence. And this is ongoing everywhere, in every sphere of life. You introduce something new, and then you have resistance from those who are established in what we believe is old. That is the old. On Sunday, I asked a very senior member of the church, what happened in 1835? Were our chiefs converted, or were they asked to conform? We have one Turambete here and one Taltala here. They might be able to tell me what happened in 1835 in Fiji. What did the missionaries tell Fijian chiefs? Convert or conform? And what did the chiefs tell the people? Convert or conform? The cross or the club? You convert or you die. They were talking about spiritual death, but people then feared physical death. If you didn't convert, the musket was used on you. The chiefs had the muskets at the time. They killed those that didn't want to lotu. We have come a long way from that. But the root cause of all the things we're going through is the mind, the people's mind. It's manufactured here and manifested here. How do we get people to be in dialogue? Unfortunately, at lunch, I joked about this is a monologue. Here we're trying to preach to the converted. Those that we want to convince come in and speak and go. So you should do a better job next time on whoever is organizing this thing. Get the people in, sit down, like Jairam Reddy and I, we came from poles apart. And somebody managed to get us together, and then we had real dialogue. Otherwise, we have a series of monologues. How's my time going? Oh, okay. I thought I'd run out of time. No, you're good. So when I look at what we're trying to do, and coming from where I have come from, I mentioned in the morning the comfort I had of command after 1987 and transiting from military to civilian administration. Some of the corporals, junior NCOs, and even the junior platoon commanders in rank who came in to join me after the coup were permanent secretaries or commissioners or directors of various departments in the civil service. They helped me tell me, you are not qualified to run the government. What we know is more than what you know. The classic example is a night after the coup. I came back to the officers' mess, and everybody stood up and cheered and clapped. And then we had the first beer. After the first beer, I said, well, we now have the government. Who knows how to run the government? Death silence in the officers' mess. Who knows anything about the economy? Nobody knew anything about the economy until the transport officer said, sir, I have one corporal in the transport park cleaning the vehicles there now. What's his name? Wichongabulu. Bring him here. So Corporal Wichongabulu came up to the officers' mess that night and said, you're Corporal Wichongabulu? Yes, sir. What do you know about the economy? How much time do I have, sir? And he said, just tell me, give me about half an hour. And then after that, I said, no, anybody got any questions? They didn't even know the question to ask. So I told my chief of staff, commission this man, you will make him an officer now, you come into my staff. That was how we found ourselves. And that is why I wrote about the role of the military in socio-political development in developing nations of the world. And at that time, in 1979, there were many countries in the world going through military coups. And those that were really still struggling were the ones where the military refused to give up leadership. Somebody said, no coup is a good coup. I agree with that. No coup is right, and I agree with that. If in the eyes or in the minds of those that had to execute coups, they must understand that a coup is not the solution. It should be an interim measure at best. We have not come out of that, and we're still trying to find a position where we can at least hear each other out, and that's real dialogue. When we get to that, we'll have the solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Sidi Rambuka. Again, an excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Biman Prasad.
It's okay, I won't use that.
Yeah.
Thank you, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, for your presentation. I want to thank Dialogue Fiji for organizing this very important dialogue on social cohesion. And let me say this very clearly, that the role of CSOs or NGOs since 2006 in this country has been a very challenging one. Challenging in terms of the ability to participate, to organize, and to source funding for these sort of activities, which are absolutely vital in getting people together in multi-ethnic, multi-religious multiracial societies. And I'm actually quite disappointed to hear in some quarters that our donors, our funders, are shying away from funding these very important organizations. And I would want to urge them that in the interest of building social cohesion, building stability, creating dialogue, they need to fund a lot of CSOs in this country. We are not out of woods yet. What I am going to do basically in 6 or 7 minutes is to provide a very macro picture of what and how social cohesion needs to be understood. At a micro level, we can talk about the role of the churches, we can talk about the role of families, individual organizations, and how people can relate to each other, how different interests could be merged, how different institutions can do that. But at a macro level, I think it's about leadership. You can talk about leadership at different levels, but as a political leader, I would want to talk about political leadership in building social cohesion in this country. The first thing is we have to understand that a country comes out of a certain history, whether it is a colonial history, whether it's an immigrant history. Every country has a history. Every country has minorities. In fact, 90% of the countries around the world have minority communities. So we need to understand the nature of the country. Sometimes, political leaders come in and define a country from a point of time where they want to define. They create a new narrative about what a particular country ought to be and what the particular society ought to be. So we need to be mindful of that. The second thing is, how do we create a shared society? And I want to add to that shared society the concept of a trusted society. I think at a macro level, what we have today is a low trust society. In fact, I would put Fiji in a category of a low trust country. And when you trust, we economists place a lot of emphasis on trust. Because when you do not have trust in the country, in a society, you increase what we call the transaction costs. The task of managing that society then is very, very expensive. For example, what happened on 23rd of September, people did not believe the military. People did not believe the police force. People did not believe me. I was having all these calls. Even some of my relatives did not believe me because I was saying nothing is going to happen. This is all fake news. Which means that people do not have trust in our society. And when you set up that equilibrium, I think what we have done is we have set ourselves into a low-level equilibrium of low trust country, low trust economy. So we need to look at that. The third thing, of course, is the political leadership. And I have this view that it's not the people who create problems. It's not the people who stoke up the past to whip up racism, hate that we see being done by political leaders. And I was listening to the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, and of course he didn't have time to go into the details of that dialogue that the two communities went through to come up with a new 1997 constitution, because the 1990 constitution was an imposition. on the country. And it was never going to bring the leaders together if that constitution was not changed. Now that constitution got thrown out in 2006, and there was a process after that, as you said quite rightly, that it could have been an interim measure if what the coup maker at that time thought about what he was going to do. But then the interim measure was to relook at a new constitution, which was discussed, which went through a dialogue process. That was thrown out. So the 2013 constitution is an imposition on this country. Okay, we agree that there are provisions with respect to the Bill of Rights. Of course, there are derogations in the Bill of Rights. There are issues about the immunity. But that constitution itself is an imposition. And once you have an imposition on the country, on the society, on our people, you need to build dialogue around it to be able to come out of it. And what we have today is a leadership which does not believe in dialogue. That is the most unfortunate thing that we are going through in this country. Today, people are fearful. Today, people do not trust each other, in terms of dialogue. There is a culture of sycophancy and civility. If you are seen to be an anti-government critic, you are certain to be victim of something. So, what that means is we can bring people together, government can bring people together. They used to bring thousands of people when they're distributing cash grants and talk to them about what their policies are. But that's not the kind of dialogue we need. So, the political leadership, they say that the standard you set or the standard you fail to meet is the new floor you create. So what we have today is a country which cannot have proper dialogue even in the parliament precincts. We cannot have a cup of tea with different political leaders. We have tried, I personally called for a dialogue after 2014 election. I've been talking to the leader of the opposition. I've been talking to people in the Fiji First Party. And I'm saying, let's not forget history. Let's not forget 87 coup, 2000 coup, 2006 coup. But let's not stoke the past to whip up racism, whip up hate. That's the narrative that we are now going through. Now, what happens at the leadership level determines how people react. I remember, this is a very personal experience. After the 2006 election, in fact, I was one of the biggest critics of Gracia government from 2001 to 2006. And when I used to walk into the street, I used to get told by civil servants in the government, they used to disregard me because I was a critic of the government. But then after 2006, well, Lesenia and Gracia decided to form a genuinely multi-party government because it was a requirement in the 1997 constitution. And you could see the difference on the street because the two major communities who were having this tension were actually working together at the leadership level and running the government. And that is why the 1997 constitution was a well thought out constitution between the leader of the opposition, the leader of the NFP at that time, and the prime minister at that time, Major General Sitiveni Rambuka, and of course, Mr. Krishna Dutt is here. He was a very important player in the whole process of getting that constitution. They will tell you why that multi-party provision was so important. It was not tokenism, it was mandatory for political leaders, even if they didn't like what happened during the election. But once they were elected, once the result was out, they were mandated to work and show the country that, or they were forced constitutionally to work together to produce the outcome for what the people wanted. So, to me, if the leadership is not engaging in dialogue, people are afraid. I have a cousin who doesn't even talk to me because he's a Fiji First supporter, and I respect that. But he says, if I am seen with you in public, I might lose the contract. Whether this is happening or not, this is the kind of thing that people are talking about. So what we need genuine dialogue. The two things that I want to suggest before we finish up. I think we have a situation today where the economy has been mismanaged. I think we should expect serious economic consequences down the line for the next 2 years. People will be facing a lot of hardships. And I call upon the government to start this important national dialogue of calling an economic summit, developing a new charter for our economy for the next 2 or 3 years. And there we can all come in as political leaders, as stakeholders, with government to take the country forward economically. The second thing I want to suggest, because the 2013 Constitution was imposed, it's time, after 4 years or 5 years, for us to set up a joint parliamentary committee to look at the 2013 Constitution and move towards a constitution which will have the approval of the whole country through proper dialogue processes and the mechanisms that the Joint Parliamentary Committee should decide. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be very happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Professor Prasad, for your critical contribution to this dialogue. The next speaker is Ms. Ruby Kwanson.
Thank you, sir. Where is he? On a lighter note, Professor Prasad indicated that he's got some information on me, so I asked him whether it's fake news or real news. And we're still investigating that. If anybody wants to be on the committee that investigates that, I'll be happy to employ you. Good afternoon again. I'm happy to get to the reason why I came here in the first place, which is to make these submissions at the end of the day. I make these submissions bearing in mind the conversation we had yesterday and especially this morning. And I think we left yesterday and some of what we said at the end of our group work today pointed to the fact that we need to talk. We need to talk about social cohesion. And our need to talk about social cohesion suggests that something is not right. And generally, we have established in this room that we are plagued by division, polarization, suspicion, and mistrust. It is global. And so I make these submissions not from a Fijian perspective, but mindful of what is happening in many places and seeing what we can glean from that. There are enough elements on the table right now to indicate that peace is threatened, especially if peace practitioners and academics recognize that peace is not the absence of violence. It is that deeply seated anxiety that we all feel. And the consensus, I think, without going around the room is now we need to talk about these things. But when do we talk? And how do we talk? Who do we talk to? And what do we talk about? Many, many people around the world are tired and frustrated with actionless talk. Some of us turn meetings down these days rather politely, but sometimes it could sound arrogant because sometimes I say, where is this one going? Is there going to be another meeting for emissions in the air for me to come all the way? Sometimes we kind of wonder who is going to build the peace and the social cohesion we're talking about. Sometimes it sounds as if there is some peace entity somewhere to do the work. And usually the state and government and opposition leaders and the political parties are overflogged for these things. Here is the point. Leaders come and go. Society stays. When I was putting these pointers down, I was reminded of a conversation I had with one of my friends, colleagues, a couple of years ago in Zimbabwe, when, as some of you recall, President Robert Mugabe had overstayed and there was a lot of dictatorship and so on. And we had fought a lot on many things around peace and security on the continent. Now, I had just come here doing some work in Vanuatu and so on, and I asked them, I said, comrades, what's happening? I'm not hearing anything moving in your country. And one of my colleagues said, you know, the old man is old. We're just going to wait for him to die. Interestingly, as you know, Mugabe died a couple of weeks ago. Last week, one of these colleagues had sent me a script to review and to decide where we take that. And it was a very gruesome account of what happened in one of the elections in that country. And as I was reading through that, I thought, you see, actually I was reading it on the day they buried President Mugabe. And I said to myself, waiting for him to die, huh? He's dead, but the problem still exists. This is to say that the work around social cohesion is not about leaders alone. Leadership is critical, absolutely critical, but society cannot throw in the towel. And I speak about these things not because I want to theorize, because that's how I've experienced it. When I sat back, it didn't work. When I got in, there was a sense of fulfillment. And so this afternoon, I want to reflect on two ways of looking at this, two ways in which people in my network look at this. And it is not at all something that is imposed on anyone, but for reflection purposes. I want to talk about, as the title of my paper said, I want to talk about deliberative talks. And my predecessors have mentioned dialogue, the need to talk. And I love the personal examples that came out, because as we listened to them, we were able to sift through which conversations were useful and those that were not, which conversations excluded people and those that included people. Was the process moving on, you asked? And they said, we're having problems. When you talk about, we can't just be there, we've got to have a different kind of conversation. I'm talking about that conversation that allows us to have a historical deliberation. And the notion of historical deliberation, as many of my colleagues around the world have engaged in, it's not easy. It's tough. It pulls you apart. I've sat through some of these things in Israel and so on. I leave feeling very drained. But it's useful because it gives us an opportunity not just to talk about the past, but to reimagine the past, to look at the options we could have taken, and for that information to propel us forward. For those involved in deliberative talks, it's a different kind of talk. And I'm pleased that one of the reasons I came here today, because I have colleagues in Fiji who are now part of that that work around the world, including Dialogue Fiji, PCP, CCF, and others. And we focus on what is the issue about. We say the issue you talk about should be one in which others can be part of. And the point to make is that most of the things we talk about, we present them in ways that exclude others. Immediately excludes others. Now, do you think I would come and join you if you present an issue that excludes my face and the way it looks like? Or my orientation and the way it looks like? No. So we place a lot of emphasis in talking about these things in ways that will bring many people together, but not just talk. Talk that allows us to look at various options. Now, you look around the room and you revisit the conversations you had at your table, and I know that there were times you wish somebody would look at the other side of the story. I know there were times you wish someone else would present the other side, or the one who is not in the room. These are not easy conversations, but for me, those are the kinds of conversations that have pushed us out of the places where we are stuck. In these conversations, we want to make decisions collectively. I mean, everybody here can cite an example of how somebody else has made a decision for you. I always say to people, I'm done hearing someone else tell me what to do. I come from a post-colonial country. Someone has already told my ancestors what to do. So stop. Give me the opportunity to think for myself. And this is why we need to begin to think about the kind of talks that includes us in identifying what we want to talk about, includes us in looking at the options, includes us in getting to a decision, but more importantly, includes us in the action. And I want to talk about action because too many of us are comfortable talking and going. And we will see that at the end of the today, I asked Nilesh, what happens after today? Does everyone in this room see a responsibility? So deliberative talks is tough, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. My colleagues in these organizations are very well exposed to that. The second thing I want to talk about, unpopular as it may be, it's, as you saw in my title, co-production. And I'm going to just put this up so it looks a bit, I miss my uncle. The idea of co-production, which was, I think, popularized by Alina Ostrom, the economist, who I think won the Nobel Prize in 2009, yes. And the idea of co-production, it sounds like a word in industry because you produce a good. But co-production in governance is suggesting that citizens and officials can create the public good together. And, for us, in a group of colleagues around the world who are struggling, and I like to say struggling because it's not easy. I have a colleague in Lebanon who wrote to me and said, you know what, Ruby, I have a problem with this co-production thing. I don't think I can reason with this government. And that's the reality of it. How do you work with someone who doesn't want to work with you? Well, we talk a lot about government by the people, government for the people, government of the people. What about government with the people? And so we talk about the with strategy. Could civil society organizations, could public institutions, could the private sector, and all other stakeholders begin to see a with in the way they do things, that this is not about them alone? I have endless examples of trying this. When I was working in electoral politics, liaising with the Electoral Commission, the Chief Justice Office, the police, the media, and the Inter-Party Advisory Committee was our way. Recognizing that we were not going to build peace unless we liaise way ahead of elections with these critical organizations. One of our most successful election management process and peace building was with religious organizations. We had one of our cardinals from the Vatican even join, just to show that people troop towards these religious leaders, and they're the ones we have to work with. So that second bit is on the with, working with people. it takes a strong mindset change on the part of officials as well as citizens. But you will soon, if you put yourself to that, and I know some of the NGOs I've worked with over the years are already changing their programs at the local level to begin to look at that. I will leave them to share their own testimonies. But I'll tell you what, this effort is undermined by the mutual mistrust and suspicion that our senior colleagues talked about. But it is this same mistrust and suspicion that should motivate a co-production. How else do we work with people when they are there and we are here? Are we going to talk forever and they're not hear about it? So we believe that working together sometimes and most times, and I can only speak from experience, most times has reduced the tension. Guess what? This mistrust is the same thing in civil society. Those of us in civil society should not pretend that all is rosy in our sector. We have suspicion among us. I've worked in this sector for so long in so many places. There's so much suspicion. There's so much funding rivalry. There is so much programmatic rivalry. So are we going to sit around and pretend that we don't have issues? There's mistrust in civil society, is in the private sector, and so it is in government. These processes do not get government off the hook. These processes says we've got to find spaces in which we are there with them at every level. I started at grassroots community level, at regional level, international level. I still go in and out of it. Is it easy? No. But we cannot rest in the armchairs and just be armchair critics. I'll say more later.
Okay, thank you, Ruby, for adding a very interesting international dimension to our discussions. Okay, just to clarify, we had one more speaker, Rear Admiral Williame Naupoto, who's the commander of the Republic of Fiji military forces. He could not make it and he sent his apologies. Okay, what we're going to do now is have a Q&A. We've got 10 minutes. And the same format applies. You can make a comment or ask a question. Please keep it brief.
First of all, I would like to thank the esteemed members of the panel this afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be amongst you and listening to your wonderful presentation. My question is perhaps if it could be answered by Reverend Tundreo and Mr. Rambuka in that order. I come from the LGBTIQ community, and we are always wondering what will be the relationship, or what is the relationship between the church and the LGBTIQ community, and maybe the SODALPA, which is a conservative party, towards the LGBTIQ community. We've heard during the panel yesterday that none of the political parties actually campaigned on this matter. We members of the community understand it's a very sensitive matter. It might not get you a win in the elections. The reality of our lives as LGBT Fijians is that the church is a source of most of our discrimination, ostracization, and othering as a community. And the community of the Fijians get their cue from the church. So first to Reverend, if you can just give me a direction as to what really has the church got to offer to our community, and then Mr. Rambuka from the SODALPA party. Thank you.
Savinak, the church policy, the doctrines of the Methodist Church state very clearly that homosexuality is not acceptable. That's the doctrine of the church. The choice by the individual is an individual choice. But the church and its teachings believe that a person can change. So this is the position of the Methodist Church. The church also understands, therefore, the position of the law as it stands in Fiji about marriage being about a man and a woman. The church believes that sexuality is reserved for that kind of relationship. Thank you.
The party has, I issued a statement before the election, then when I was asked, and I said, what does the law say? And the law says a union between a man and a woman. And well, that is the law. We have a lot of our young members and not so young members who understand the positions of where the organization is coming from and their views. We even have some family members who are into the communities, but they do not. We do not shut the door on them at home. They are members of the family. They are our relatives. They remain our relatives. So we would rather just not touch onto the area where religion and the law have made stands.
If I can just add, our party had put a policy or statement in the manifesto. We said very clearly that the LGBT community rights must be respected. They must be allowed to have dialogue and conversation across our communities. And we also said that that dialogue on the rights of the LGBT community needs to take place. I mean, 30 years ago in Australia, nobody ever imagined that they will have a same-sex marriage law. But Australia did have that. So conversation and dialogue is never bad.
Okay, Roshika? Okay, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, this is just a comment. I think it's very important to realize it's not about marriage. It's not about rocking up to church and getting married there. It's really about social justice. And that we need to remember that we are a secular state and we need to act like it as well. If political parties do not want to talk about this, then where will we talk about this? It's about ensuring that minority communities are represented. And we can't keep hiding behind the veil of religion and not discuss these things. It's about time, people.
Okay, we'll take one more question on this issue, if there is a question, and then we'll move on to the other subjects. No? Okay, who's next? Okay, go, whichever one.
So I have, I suppose, a comment and a question together. One of the things that came out from Ruby's presentation and also that I heard from others was about the historical injustices, deliberating on history. So historical deliberations was the word that was used. And then its relationship with social cohesion and having sustainable peace. So one of the models around the world that's used in a lot of divided and conflicted society or post-conflict is having a Truth, Reconciliation and Justice Commission. Closer to home, it's happened in Solomon Islands and in many other parts of the world. And that's something, the current government does not support. However, there has been a lot of discussions on it at various parts of the last 10 years or so, and even longer. I have a question for Mr. Rambuka, and others also please feel free to comment if you would like to. In the SODELPA manifesto, there is mention of a truth and reconciliation sort of model. However, it explicitly leaves out 1987. It mentions 2000, it mentions 2006 coups, and I just want to hear what was the rationale behind that. Why was that?
Say that again?
In the SODELPA manifesto for the 2018 election, when the manifesto was released, there is mention of a truth reconciliation model in terms of addressing a lot of the injustices or moving forward. However, it leaves out 1987. So in that particular paragraph, it mentions 2000, it mentions 2006 coup, but it doesn't mention anything of the 1987 coup. And I want to understand what was the rationale, why was that left out? And a very quick question for the Methodist Church, in terms of your key results area number 5, you talk about interchurch activities and also interreligion. It was quite concerning recently when during the conference there was discussions over Facebook and in the media of pastors being invited to help convert the Indo-Fijian community, the Hindu, the non-Christian Indo-Fijian community into the church. So I just want to hear what exactly happened. Why are we having this conversation? If the Methodist Church has a key result area to promote interreligious activities and to work with other religions, why the conversion and just the thinking behind it? Like why is that happening in current times, and how do we plan to move towards social cohesion if these are the things that are happening that further adds fuel to the division that already exists, and the insecurity and the fear and the apprehension all combined? So thank you.
The absence of the 1987 thing was not, I did not engineer that, but I felt after reading it that perhaps people who drafted the manifesto at that time had felt that 1987 had taken a full circle to get to the 1997 Constitution. And that process of the constitutional re-engineering and the enactment of the Constitution Amendment Act was the process of understanding what happened in 87. But if we're going to set up one, we cannot avoid going over 1987 again.
I agree. I think that's a very valid question. And any attempt to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or committee or group must include all the coups, including the 87.
I would like to very distinctly separate historical deliberation as a process from Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. As you ask the question, my mind goes to the South African process, the Rwandan process, and partly the Ghanaian process. And these are processes in which victims especially had the opportunity to come and talk about what happened. A lot of criticism against that has been, and so what? What happens after that? Historical deliberation as a form of dialogue is one that is mostly citizens-led. One thing that's powerful about that is you don't wait on government, and you don't get into why was 1 year left out, because in the Ghanaian process too, a certain period of the coup was left out, and so that undermined the credibility of it. And by citizens' process doesn't mean that it's just individuals. Actually, in a recent process I listened in on some of my colleagues in Russia, it was carried out by the university. The university had decided to incorporate that into his curriculum. And that's what I mean by how much power is in our hands, because a school can decide that part of our history syllabus, we're gonna have historical deliberations. And the essence is to learn and to move forward in a way that is informed. It is very, very different from TRCs, which have a lot of limitations so far in many places.
Okay, just a reminder to please keep your questions and answers short and to the point, so we can have more robust discussions. Go ahead.
So I will be very brief. I think, as I showed from scriptures, the commission for the church is to evangelize, to take the gospel to everyone. It cannot vary from that. In today's language, it's going to be constitutional when you want to do anything. A reaction from people who do not belong to your denomination or who are atheistic, that is the purpose of the church. And therefore, the freedom needs to be understood for the church or the members. It's really the faith of the citizens. When they practice their faith, it includes talking about their faith to others. The choice of the individual to change their religion ought to be protected as well. And that's where the space is. The church will go and evangelize where it believes it is needed. Of course, people are free to choose not to allow our missionaries when they come. But already people are coming. Already our members are going to other denominations. They're going to join non-Christian churches. And that's part of the challenge. But it is a responsibility. So that's really what we are trying to do. It's nothing about being antagonistic or forcing anyone, but it's doing its job according to its call. I just want to say very briefly to that, in the church, they talk about the method is quadrilateral. When you make decisions, the foremost, it must be scriptural. The second, it must be based on your experience with God and how that has actually transpired over time, personally or as a nation. Third, you have to make sure that that is based on experience. You have, it's based on tradition. There are methods which we have accepted, and what you have actually mentioned belong to this area. How we relate to those who are not of our faith in the practices we have. But the final one is, it's got to be reasonable. You do your research, and then you do what you do.
Thank you. Aman. Okay, sorry, you've got the mic, go ahead.
Thanks, Shalin. My question is to Mr. Ramuka. I just wanted to get one example of how the committee, the 1997 Review Commission, managed to tackle a very crucial or hard issue. Because as you said, the two parties were far apart, poles apart. So, and the 1997 constitution eventuated. But there may have been situations or times when certain issues were difficult to get across. So what were the things you did? How did you manage? Because that's something that we find leaders are very difficult to do at this time.
Well, to the 1987 and the 1997 Constitution work, it was very clearly defined lines. I led the 1987, and the SBT group was seen as the perpetrators of the coup, whereas the Federation Party and the Labour Party were the victims of the 87 coup. And if they had decided, they were right. I don't want to talk to that man. We had no right to say, we don't want to talk to those. So we had a freer hand of choice. So when I said, I'm prepared to speak to you or to talk to you. I said, okay, come and give it a try. It was easier from our side, from the perpetrator side, rather than from the victim side. That's why we managed to do it then. And at this time, the perpetrators are not even willing to speak or talk to those who see themselves as victims of that thing, of the 2000 and 2006.
Next question, Aman.
Thank you, Dr. Shalin. It's not actually a question, but more of a comment on on the issue posed by Roshika on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. During my encounter with Professor Thuli Mendensola, the former public prosecutor of South Africa and one of the architects of the South African Constitution post-94 apartheid, and also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and narrated to about Fiji's experience. The thing is that we haven't had the space for the victims and the oppressors to dialogue, to talk on the issues faced, we have had like on the issues that was faced by the by this nation as a result of the 4 coups. There was no space for like a dialogue and deliberations, and that is why I believe that it is important, perhaps in the near future, that there needs to be a commission that would bring about that in order to bring about the change whereby the wounds of the past could be healed. I know it's easier said than done. It's more like opening the can of worms, but it is worth pursuing, considering that like we haven't had various political parties, successive governments that came, they had their own agendas, but as a nation to move forward, I believe that it is it's a noble idea. Yes, it is easier said than done. We have had it's not a perfect process, but worth pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you. Zephaniah first, and then Reverend Aquila.
Thank you. This is a question to Mr. Biman and Mr. Sitibe Rambuka. When you talk about dialogue, something that always confused me in Parliament, can enlighten us the level of dialogue between the opposition and the government. We form assumptions that there is not a lot of dialogue. And why there isn't a lot of dialogue? How can we achieve dialogue? Because lack of dialogue, we have a lot of implication and to how we run the government. It's always nice to see people after in the media, when after the parliamentary session, you come out, you mingle, you smile to each other. But when you come to discussing issue in the parliamentary chamber, you like an enemies, Can you enlighten us about this level of dialogue within the parliament vicinity? Vinaka.
Okay, let's keep the Q&A short as we round up this session.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I could give you a very long answer, but what we have in this country today is a very dictatorial system, right from the parliament, and I can go back to 2014, where the government, in our view, they denied, but in our view, the government dictatorially decided that the opposition parties would not have the adequate resources. They unilaterally changed the standing orders to take away the most important, committee chair from the opposition, the Public Accounts Committee. They further changed the standing orders this year to restrict the way in which the parliament, can operate, and where the opposition and the government, because in a democracy, the opposition is as important as the government. And a good government, one which believes in transparency, accountability, and sees Parliament as the supreme oversight institution, will allow the opposition not only the resources but also the mechanism within the parliamentary system to raise issues. So, because we are not able to do that, any suggestion for dialogue, for example, moving a motion to set up a parliamentary committee on drug, which is not a bipartisan issue. The government comes out and says, no, we can't support that. So it's been a very difficult political environment since 2014. And I think the experience that the NFP and Labour Party had with the SBT government between 1992 and 1999 does demonstrate the value of dialogue. And we haven't stopped there. Both me and the leader of the opposition, since the last election, we have talked about having a dialogue with the government, with ministers. Of course, we talk privately. Privately, many on the government side come and complain like hell about what's going wrong there, but obviously they're not able to articulate that in Parliament.
What is dialogue? Is it two people coming together and sharing their views? What for? We come into Parliament, we present our views, they present theirs. The result is never reflective of our contribution. They say that's democracy. The majority view is accepted. So what is dialogue? Therefore, I can say that there is no level of dialogue, meaningful dialogue ever in Parliament now.
Okay, final three quick questions. Reverend Aquila Yambaki, Krishna Dutt, and Chope Tarai. Then we close this session.
Thank you. Just going back to the issue of TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, South Africa. Now, don't forget that in the 1997 Constitution, this partly answers your question. In the process of the 1997 Constitution, the Commission went as far as Mauritius, went to South Africa. They went to learn from the experiences of other places. That's an important part of constitutional process. South Africa, you saw the picture of Uncle Mandela there, and some of us have been to Robben Island and visited. But in the early days of CCF, in my time, we invited speakers from South Africa, including the Chief Justice, one who became later the Chief Justice, youth activists. They were coming. They gave lectures and workshops on young people and different areas of the Constitution. But it's important to note the learning from other countries. That is what is missing here. That we were learning from South Africa at that point. And before I left CCF, I got very close to the point of getting the TRC people over. And I think the gentleman who was in charge of South African High Commission at the time regretted the fact that I left CCF and we hadn't continued that. But so that's that kind of option is still open, learning from the experiences of the difficulties faced by other countries. And I think it's important to keep that within the constitutional process, learning lessons from other traditions.
Yeah, I just had a small comment. Going back to the initial question about, I think you raised the question to Steve on the way in which we worked through the 1997 Constitution. I think it's important for us in terms of building social cohesion to have more light thrown on how we actually did it. I think the first thing is that once the 1990 Constitution was put in place and all the parties decided to come back in 1992, the second election of that under that Constitution, there was a very clear understanding between all the protagonists, so to say, that the ultimate goal is to work towards a more democratic and a more participative constitution. This was understood by both sides clearly, and we worked towards that. So that in the selection of the JPSC, the leader of the SVT, at that time Rambuka, made sure that only those people would go in there who were psychologically in that kind of a framework to give and take. I remember one person was told very clearly by the leader, if you don't want to behave this way, you can go out. Now that's the kind of, you wanted to build up a team where you had this. Now we had some doubting Thomases within the parties as well. Unfortunately, they were not involved in the nitty-gritties. So the leaders kept out of the JPSC. And as Steve has said, that Philippe was in the chair. Was a very moderate man, very likable personality. And I go a long way with him. And in an informal way, I sort of became the champion of the opposition parties. And because personally we had developed trust in ourselves, going back as teachers, I think that helped quite considerably. And I talk with experience because there were 5 subcommittees that were set up, and out of the 5, I was in 3 of them and couldn't be in the other 2 because of timetabling problems. So I think that was very important, the choice of the people who were in there. And the ability and their capacity to build trust across barriers. That was extremely important. I was a bit alarmed to see in your pamphlet, for instance, in the preamble somewhere it says that trust has been tried and it hasn't worked very well, something to that effect. I don't think that's quite accurate. I mean, where trust has been genuinely tried, it has worked, and it led us to build that. The second thing which was there, enveloping the whole dialogue and discussion, was a very subtle presence of international community, which made a good thorough analysis of the 1990 Constitution and said this is areas in which this is flawed, and we should work towards it, which both parties accepted. Now, I don't see the international community playing any kind of a role now. At least that kind of a role they're not playing. If anything, they're supportive of all this. This is good democracy, it's working well. It's not working well. I mean, you have to open your eyes. So, you know, some of these kinds of factors that played to build this kind of a trust. And I still think, despite the preamble on your communique there, that we still need to develop that kind of a trust. And I think goodwill is there, plentiful. Somehow we have to find strategies to motivate the other side. I don't see this side lacking that, because I'm told that Rambuka actually went and approached the Prime Minister whether they could work together in a government of national unity or something. And there has been no response. But let's not be pessimistic about it. Yeah. There is hope that we can, at some stage, and this kind of a dialogue here, and the spread of this message, that this is what the people are thinking, may assist and help in bringing people together. Thank you.
Thank you. As far as the international factor goes, maybe China is to blame, but that's another discussion. Chope Tarai, last question, and then we have to close this session. A quick response from the panel, and then we close this session.
Someone watching this has responded to my comment. Someone watching this. Just to say, when I was speaking about the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was, I should have mentioned that Ngarse's government started a kind of, I've forgotten what it was called, but it was a truth and, not truth, but reconciliation. You got that? Yes. He started that. But the trouble with that, he introduced amnesty. Someone who's going through the process could call for amnesty right away, and that interfered with the process. Okay? That's the answer to that.
Thank you, Reverend Mbaki. Chope Tarai.
Naka, my question is to the leader of the opposition. I just wanted to ask about power. I think there are very few people in the world and in our country that has the same experience of so much power, the concentration of power. And my question is specifically, in what way or what happened that compelled you to ultimately share that power? And the second part of that, in that process from 87 to 97, and the second part is, how do you see the incumbent at the moment in terms of how he deals with power? And what do you think would be ultimately a situation, if not a change, to compel him to share that power? Because I notice a lot of the discussions hasn't touched on the power. And how does that, in a way, allow you as a leader, I mean, seeing on the other side, the notion of so much power?
Okay, short, sweet answers, please.
Okay. You get addicted to power. You hang on to it for too long, you won't let it go.
But you sort of shared it to some extent through 97?
Well, 87 to 97 is 10 years, and then 99, another 2 years under the new constitution. I felt the new constitution was a victory, and when we lost the election, I said to the world that Constitution was worth losing an election for.
Wow. That's amazing.
Just on the Truth and Reconciliation, I think it's an important issue, because unless we have something like that, the narrative is going to remain one of stoking the past and blaming everybody else. So after 87, the 1990 Constitution, the SBT government on one side, the NFP Labour on the other side, until the constitutional process started, it was very adversarial. the narrative was one of blaming the perpetrators of the coup. What we see now, after 2006, the lot that did the coup are in government, but they continue to stoke the past. All they did in the last election was talk about 87, talk about Rambuka, a vote for Biman is vote for Rambuka, and related incidences of what happened in 87 and 2000 to take away the real issues. So what we have in the end, as a result of the 2018 election, based on the results, a deeply polarized country on the basis of race. And we continue to stoke that past even after this election. And that is not the way to build social cohesion in this country and bring people together. So I think the value of having that discussion about the need for some kind of truth and reconciliation is a valid one.
Okay, what an amazing discussion. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dialogue Fiji, and thank you, participants.